What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Katson's Corner, the show where we talk about college football and the NFL draft from a Chargers perspective. I am back this week to talk about some guys that are going to stand out in the conference championship games that will be happening this evening as you're watching this on Friday, a little bit late this week. And then also on Saturday. The show is late this week. I do apologize. I have had a bit of a crazy week. If you guys follow me on any of the social media apps, you will know why. If you don't follow me, basically the gist of it is that I wrote an article about Justin Tucker, and it did very well. And so things have been a little bit hectic for me this week. And so we are a little bit late, but we are back regardless to talk about some prospects. We are going to go through some of the more interesting guys. ESPN, Matt Miller, and Jordan Reed, the draft analyst over there, wrote a great article breaking down some of the guys that are going to be playing in those conference championship games this weekend. So we're going to be borrowing from that, talking about those guys, giving a little bit of my opinion, a little bit of background on those guys. Mostly players we have not talked about yet this season, which is always a plus as well. We're up over 150 or so prospects that we've talked about on the show this year, even with missing 2 weeks in November. So feel pretty good about that. We're going to start narrowing down a little bit and going deeper on some of these guys over the next couple of weeks and months here, especially as we get into All-Star season. There'll be some great content that we have going once I get down there and kind of find some guys that I really like. We'll go, closer to 15 minutes each on two different guys and get to 30 minutes that way. May get to a point where we do 30 minutes just on the one guy. Still figuring out kind of exactly what that format is going to look like and everything, because I can't use film on these videos. Otherwise, they will get copyright claimed. So it's sort of hard to talk about a guy for more than 5 or 10 minutes without that tool, because it's just me explaining clips that I have seen and you haven't, and then you just have to trust me that I'm not making it up. So I know you guys do trust me, but it's still not the greatest video medium, at least in my opinion. And so still figuring out what that looks like. But once we do, of course, you guys will be the first to know. It will be on the channel as it has been pretty much every week this season. Before we get into the prospects for this week, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff as normal. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit the notification bell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to follow my content, if you want to be on the cutting edge of the Justin Tucker phenomenon, as some of you were earlier this week, you can follow me over on X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days, at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. You can also go over to Blue Sky. I've been very active over there lately. My username over there is just my last name, just at Katson. I do have at Alex Katson also, but that's my personal account where I'm just kind of posting random nonsense. So at Katson is the football account. But anyway, you guys know all that stuff already. You guys can go back and find that. Let's talk about some prospects. And let's start with Iowa State corner Darien Porter, who Matt Miller is the one that took the blurb for ESPN about him for the Big 12 conference championship game. And this is a corner who, according to Miller, has been getting some Tariq Woolen comparisons. And on the surface, it's pretty easy to see why. He's 6'3", 192 pounds. He's going to run a fast 40 time. Very tall, kind of high hipped, a little more built to like run in a straight line, speed type guy at corner. But this is the archetype that the NFL is trending to more and more and more over the last few seasons. Porter has already accepted a Senior Bowl invite, so the NFL is already asking to see more of him. And one of the reasons that they are asking for that is that he's only been playing corner since 2022. He's been at Iowa State this is his 6th year at Iowa State, but the first 4 years of that, he was playing corner. I guess 3 years technically. He was playing wide receiver, and then moved to corner in 2022. This season has kind of like really popped onto the radar. Has 3 interceptions already this season. He's only allowed completions on 28.6% of his primary defender snaps this season. So basically, if he is being targeted, essentially, is what that means, I think. Uh, the way that Miller phrases it here. I would assume that's what that means. But basically, he's giving up no receptions the entire season. He is also the Iowa State, as in the state of Iowa, not Iowa State University. The state of Iowa, record holder in the 400 meters, ran a 46.99 as a high school senior. And so, again, you expect the 40 time to bear out pretty well with that. Was more of a 200, 400 guy. And so there may be a little bit of build-up speed that doesn't necessarily translate as well in a setting like the 40. Um, but if he were to run over a longer distance, you'd see some of that build-up speed kind of come up. So a little bit variable on what the 40 time may look like there. But again, getting some Tariq Woolen comparisons, I think the play style is very similar. It's going to be a little bit boom or bust in the sense that, like, Tariq Woolen came into the NFL and as a rookie had, I think it was 7 interceptions his rookie season, and everyone was like, "Wow, this is the next great corner. This is the archetype for what a corner looks like in the modern NFL because you have to be able to box out these receivers that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger." And now that we've gotten another 2 years of Tariq Woolen, we're kind of like, "Oh, this is a regular corner." And we're starting to see some flaws that you can kind of exploit against Woolen. And a lot of those have to do with the fact that if you run a route that has any break on it laterally against Tariq Woolen, you can usually get open against him because his hips are so stiff because he's so tall that it makes it very easy to make a cut and create separation on him. And Porter is kind of the same way, where I think he's going to be a much more of a straight line athlete, much more of a run up and down. But he also isn't as super experienced as a press man corner. Really, no one in college is typically. College schemes just don't run press that much. It's not really as effective of a technique in the college game because of how wide the hashes are and how some of the offenses operate differently than the way that they do in the NFL. That's starting to change a little bit and kind of reach a middle point, but right now it's still sort of like defenses have yet to adjust and run a little bit more press at the college level. But he's not super proficient with it, and so he doesn't use that size as much as you'd expect him to. And so right now I think you're really looking at him as more of like a cover 3 corner, or a man corner. And the Chargers have run a decent amount of cover 3, but it's not a ton. And so there is a question of fit there. But I think if you are going to implement that more, it could be that they're not doing that because it's a personnel problem, of course. And so if you're going to implement that more a little bit, I think you can get longer, you can get bigger at corner. Obviously, corner is a position that the Chargers have talked about. Well, we have talked about for the Chargers as a need potentially. Obviously, Cam Hart and Tariq Steele are lighting it up right now as rookies. Once we get Hart back, we'll kind of see exactly what that's going to look like long term. I still do think that Tariq Steele is probably best suited in the nickel, and so if you're going to add another corner, you're going to want to add one on the outside. Although Steele is proving me wrong about that week over week over week. So who knows at this point? But Porter is a guy that has day 2 grades, and so you wouldn't have to even go up into round 1 to get him. You can probably get him in, the second or third round. And at that point, as an investment, as a potential starter, I think you feel a little bit better. Moving on here to SMU running back Brashard Smith. Shout out Jay Herbo in the Discord, who has been begging me to talk about this guy for weeks because he is an SMU fan. This is a 5'10", 196-pound running back for the Mustangs that's going to be in the American Conference Championship game against Clemson on Saturday. He transferred from Miami, where he played wide receiver. This is his first year playing running back, and so everyone is going to go, Deebo Samuel. Not quite, but I understand where you're coming from a little bit. Has a lot of experience as a kick returner, a lot of experience as sort of a weapon in space, kind of a gadgety player when he was at Miami, but has really blossomed as a running back for SMU this season. I think the comparison that I have for him is closer to like an Antonio Gibson type, who's with the Patriots now, was drafted by the Commanders originally, where he played wide receiver at Memphis and actually made the transition to running back kind of during his senior season at Memphis, but kind of just during the pre-draft process, and then ended up getting drafted as a running back. And his role in the NFL that entire time has been more of a satellite back. He's not going to be a big, powerful back between the tackles. You're trying to get him on some runs outside. You're trying to get him some opportunities in the receiving game. You're trying to use him a little bit more as a versatile piece than as a true running back. And I think that's going to be a lot of what Smith's value is going to be as well. if you look at the way that the running back room is constructed for the Chargers going into 2025, J.K. Dobbins is a free agent. We don't really know what that's going to look like quite yet because the knee injury sort of complicates things where Dobbins was playing really well. He was on track for a 1,000-yard season, but now he's gotten hurt again with another knee injury that's put him on injured reserve. Do you feel comfortable extending a player like that? And if you do, is that going to be more than a year or two, right? To come back and potentially try to have to come back from another knee injury. Obviously, this one not as serious, but still, it's sort of like the buildup of that wear and tear. You have Gus Edwards under contract for 2025 because he signed a 2-year deal. He's been a little bit up and down in terms of effectiveness. Obviously, was dealing with that ankle injury earlier in the season as well. And so some of that is still getting back from that. You have Kamani Vidal, who's a little bit more of that pass catching back, a little bit more of that sort of explosive back, but he's also really, really compact and he's really proficient between the tackles. That's sort of what we were so drawn to from his film at Troy when he was coming out of the draft. And so you don't really have a like true receiving back on the roster in 2025 right now because so far the Chargers have used Dobbins in that role. And so if you're concerned about the long-term health of Dobbins, you're concerned about the way that he's going to be able to come back from this latest knee injury, or if you're concerned about the fact that they keep giving jet sweeps to Jalen Reagor and they keep giving all of these screens and stuff to Jalen Reagor, you can just replace all of those snaps with a guy like Brashard Smith, who won't necessarily be like a one-to-one replacement for Darius Davis, who's obviously a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact, more of a slot receiver, but it gives you a little bit more versatility that you can use on the offense there, which I think the Chargers would be well suited to add because right now, if you bring Darius Davis on the field, you kind of know that there's going to be a sweep to Davis happening on the play. If you bring in Smith for some of those plays, there's a little bit more variance in what that can be in terms of like what the play is going to be. I do think that it's sort of similar to when Ravens brought in Devin Duvernay a little bit, where Duvernay was their kick returner, their punt returner. He was more of a traditional wide receiver, but when he was coming out of the draft, everyone's scouting report on Devin Duvernay was this is a wide receiver that plays like a running back. And that's essentially what Smith is because he's only been playing running back for this season. And so I think again, like if you're drawing parallels between the Ravens and the way that they've operated because there's so many ties to that franchise with this team, I think that it's a very similar situation that could end up being a really good fit for the Chargers. There is going to be some third down value limitations just because he's not really a good pass protector because he's only been playing running back for like 8 months and so hasn't really learned the technique for it quite yet, but that's something that you can sort of develop. Gus Edwards is on the team to pass protect. You can bring him in on third downs and have him do that. It does limit your outlet options a little bit as a receiver. And so you'd like a guy that's a little bit more all around. But as a guy who has 4th or 5th round grades, according to Jordan Reed from ESPN in this article, I think you feel comfortable with that. And you say, like, okay, we can develop that a little bit. He's only been playing the position for a year. Moving on here to Jacksonville State guard Clay Webb. Jacksonville State is in the Conference USA Championship game that starts at 4 o'clock this afternoon. If you're watching this on Friday when it comes out, he's 6'3", 310. This is actually a guy that we talked about on this show before. But as I was looking through my notes from the season, I couldn't find him. And I realized it's because I'm pretty sure we talked about him last season when I was talking about him potentially coming out a little bit early. Did transfer from Georgia. He's a former 5-star recruit. There's a little bit of background there that I think the Chargers will have to dig through. There's a bullying scandal from when he was in high school that's kind of gross, to be honest. And so you kind of have to work through some of that, but also some of it may no longer be a concern from the maturity of being in college for a few years. But did transfer out of Georgia. Wasn't able to really find too much playing time there, and so transferred down to Jacksonville State and has really blossomed at guard since transferring there in 2022. He's played over 1,500 snaps and has only allowed 5 pressures and 3 sacks in those snaps all time at Jacksonville State. And so if you're looking for a guard or an interior offensive lineman in general that can pass protect, you have found one. The issue is that it's at the G5 level and it's a player that was at the P5 level and was not able to find playing time. And granted, that's at Georgia, right? And so you say like, okay, you know, There are plenty of guys that can't find playing time at Georgia. Most of the guys that get drafted in the first round from Georgia on the offensive line are guys that only started for a year because there were too many guys at Georgia. And so that balance of that conversation is going to be a lot of the process with Webb. Also, super physical run blocker. I think he's one of the best run blockers in the country this season, in my opinion. I am a really big fan of his game on the field. I do think, again, there's going to be some minor off the field stuff that teams are going to have to pick through, whether or not that's, behind him truly or not. And then also there's some debate over what position he's going to play in the NFL. He's played guard primarily at Jacksonville State. Some teams that think that he's a center. Honestly, for the Chargers, that might be a good problem to have. For some other teams, they're going to, have a little bit of question about, okay, where are we going to play this kid? But for the Chargers, I think you just pick him and then you figure it out later because you need a guard and you need a center. And so it doesn't really matter where he can play as long as he can play. Jordan Reed for ESPN did note that Webb is viewed as an early to mid day 3 prospect right now, which means like 4th, 5th, maybe early 6th round. Uh, might rise a little bit during the pre-draft process. Again, I think a lot of that is going to have to do with his interviews. Hate to keep harping on that, but it's just going to be the case. Against a Western Kentucky defense that is very poor stopping the run, I think you're going to get some potential highlight plays from Webb here, which is a rare thing for an offensive lineman. And so I think if you don't have anything else going on this afternoon and want to watch the Conference USA Championship game, I know I will tune in probably for the second half once I get home from work. Webb is definitely going to be a guy to watch there. Moving on to Marshall edge rusher Mike Green. This is one of my favorite players in the draft class. I'm not going to lie to you guys. He's 6'4", 248 pounds. This is a guy who my friend Devin Jackson, who's also a friend of the show, I run a Substack with him on the NFL draft that's going to get pretty active as we get into the next few months here. So keep an eye out for that. But Devin introduced me to Mike Green over the summer because he's a guy that kind of popped last year for Marshall, transferred in from, I think it's Virginia Tech, I want to say. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that sounds right. Maybe it was Virginia. It's one of the Virginia schools. But transferred down to Marshall. He's second in the FBS in sacks this season with 16, fourth in pressure rate, pressure percentage, that is, at 17.1%. He has been phenomenal this season. I think that he's a first-round caliber player. Matt Matt Miller, who is the one that wrote the blurb for him in this ESPN article, said that many scouts that he's spoken to have him as a top 50 player. Miller has him at 56. I think that there is certainly going to be some variance there. I think that some teams are going to have him in the first round. I think Dane Brugler actually did have him in the first round of his mock draft that he published this week, if I remember correctly. Towards the end of the back half of the first round, I think it was 31st overall. But other teams are going to have him more as a second round player, maybe towards the back end of the second round. He is so good with his hands and he's so fast. He is one of the more advanced pass rushers in the country. The fact that he plays at Marshall has nothing to do with like how developed he is as a player. He is phenomenal. Also has plenty of special teams experience. And so if you're the Chargers and you want to draft this kid in the back half of the first round, maybe, go up a little bit and take him in the second round. But you still have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack coming back next season, and you just want to prepare for the future because you're not really sure what those two guys are going to look like in 2025. You can play Green on special teams as the fourth edge rusher. That's something that you can do. They've done that a little bit with Thule as well, with Bosa and Mack on the team, and Bud Dupree not really being like a huge special teams guy because he's a vet. But if you want to do that while also planning for the future a little bit, you can. If you want to draft him to be edge 3 and one of Bosa or Mack are not on the team, I think you can do that also and kind of bring him along a little bit slowly, bring him in as a DPR and have him wreck shop just on third downs. And if neither one of those guys are on the team next year for some reason, I think that you can also draft Green and be pretty comfortable with him as an edge too. The only reason that you wouldn't be is that he's still developing a little bit as a run defender. I think that there's a lot of speed and quickness and twitchiness to his game that I think sacrifices a little bit of the run defense because he's not as big as he could be. At 6'4", you can expect an edge rusher like that in the NFL to be closer to like 260, 270 even. He's at 248, like sub 250. I'm sure he'll probably get up to like 255 during the pre-draft process. It's probably just not something that's an emphasis for him right now. but I'm sure during the pre-draft process he'll probably get up to 255, could probably bulk up even a little bit more than that. And so at that point, like maybe you're sacrificing a little bit of the speed, a little bit of the quickness, but there's so much of it to be had that I don't really think that you're going to lose what makes him so great as a player. And then that adds a little bit of weight in run defense, adds a little bit of sand in the pants that may help mitigate some of those problems. But that would be the only reason that you're not like super stoked about playing him right away. But again, like if you want to bring him in and you want him to be like edge 3 or 4 because you're going to bring one of or both of Bosa and Mac back next season, I think that you can also bring him along slowly and it's totally fine. And that's that's in many ways the way that great franchises work, right? Is that you bring in guys to replace someone a year or two from now, not this year. You're not drafting Bosa and Max replacement to play right away. You're drafting them to play in 2026. And so that sort of dichotomy, I think, is going to be a little bit of the conversation there. But I think either way, Green makes a lot of sense. Moving to the MAC, to Miami of Ohio. This is edge rusher Brian Ugwu. I think I'm saying that right. I hope. He's 6'3", 256 pounds, transferred from Rutgers to Miami of Ohio a couple of years ago. Leads the team with 7.5 sacks this season, had 8 sacks last year as well when Miami of Ohio won the MAC last season. He has improved a ton as a run defender. And so, again, like if you're talking about some of the concerns that we had with Green, not as many of those that with Ugwu, but there are more athletic concerns with him. I think he's a much more average athlete. He is a little bit more of a straight line guy, not going to have as much bend. Probably going to be more of a late round UDFA guy. Miller says he's a late round prospect. He is a redshirt senior, so he will be coming out this year, which is a little bit weird because some places list him as a junior, and so it gets a little confusing. I don't know if I was just looking at old articles or something, but he is going to be out this year. I think this is Miller kind of alludes to this as well, actually says it outright that like this MAC title game doesn't have very many draft prospects in it. I think most of the draft prospects that played for both of these teams transferred after last season and are playing for bigger programs. Like Ohio, for example, had Curtis Rourke on the team last year. He's playing for Indiana this season. Miami of Ohio had a couple of receivers that I liked a little bit. Gage Larvadain being the main one. He's at South Carolina this year and hasn't really done anything. And so there's not a ton of NFL talent that's going to be in this game. It is at 9 o'clock in the morning. So if you're up early on Saturday and just want to put something on to kind of get you in the mood for conference championship weekend, I do think it's going to be a really good game. Miami of Ohio and Ohio are pretty even in terms of the stats. I just did a college football preview show with the podcast that I do earlier this week, which should actually also be out this morning if you are watching this on Friday. But we talked about that game at length, and it is like one of the more even conference title games of the season. And so if you're just interested in that sort of intrigue, I think the MAC title game makes a lot of sense to watch for. And if you're going to be watching that game, you might as well watch Ugwu, who's going to be sort of a developmental edge rusher ploy in this draft. And so if the Chargers want to go that route rather than taking a guy highly, then I think that he makes some sense as a potential like down the board dart throw type guy that will be in action this week. And then to close it out, we couldn't go the whole season without talking about Asthon Jeanty, who is the best running back prospect I have seen in a very long time. I think the argument that most people are having is whether or not he's a better running back prospect than Bijan Robinson. Some people have already gone as far to ask if he's the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. He is fantastic. You guys all know this. If you've watched any college football this season, even if Boise State hasn't been involved, you know what Asthon Jeanty is doing this season. He's 5'9", 217 pounds, leads the country in rushing yards, leads the country in touchdowns. He's got 28 rushing touchdowns, over 2,200 rushing yards. If his yards after contact alone were a different player, he would be second in rushing yards just after contact. He has almost 1,500 yards after contact this season. He's forced 97 missed tackles. He's so good. He has some of the best contact balance I've ever seen from any player at any level. It's so incredible to watch him just bounce off tacklers like he's playing peewee in every game. It's insane. great vision, great patience, great explosiveness, and so he sets up runs really well. He sees runs really well. He sees cutbacks really well, and has the patience and explosiveness where, like, if you don't realize that that hole is there, he's going to hit it immediately, and then you're screwed. And honestly, even if you are there, it doesn't matter because you're probably not going to tackle him. And so he is, for my money, a top 10 prospect in this class. Is he going to get to the Chargers' first round pick? At this point, with the fact that the Chargers are going to make the playoffs, I doubt it. We did this with Bijan Robinson 2 years ago, also, where everyone said, okay, he's a top 10 prospect in the draft, but I still think the Chargers will be able to draft him at 21. And then he went 7th overall. So let's not do that again. People are going to push running backs down the board because they're running backs, right? And so you're going to see mock drafts where the Chargers get Asthon Jeanty at 24 or something like that. I don't think that that's realistic. Just being honest with you. I think that, like, Bijan played at Texas, and so there's some, like, big school sort of bias that maybe you can argue there. But everyone knows who Asthon Jeanty is. It's not like this is a guy who's coming out of nowhere and is going to be, like, randomly RB1 in, like, sort of a weak year. This is the strongest running back class that we've had in years, which you could also argue maybe is going to push him down the board a little bit because teams are going to be more comfortable waiting on it. But that's typically not really what happens. Like, we make that argument every year, and then that's not really what ends up happening. In the Bijan year, that was also a pretty good running back class. And you know what happened is Bijan went 7th, and then Jahmyr Gibbs went 12th when everyone thought he was going to be a second round player, but still like a top 50 pick. And so you're going to see a similar thing. I don't think that it's necessarily super realistic for the Chargers to get Jeanty, which is also, like, why we haven't really talked about him this season, because he's kind of one of those players that is too high for the Chargers draft range, and that became apparent pretty quickly. But also, he's playing tonight at 5 p.m. against UNLV, and I think that game is going to rock. And on the off chance that he is available when the Chargers pick in the mid 20s, because for whatever reason, this is the year where running backs fall, and you want to draft an elite running back to pair with Justin Herbert, this is obviously going to be the guy. I think if you want to trade up to draft Ashtton Jeanty, trading up for a running back is blasphemous in 2024. But if you want to trade up and draft Ashtton Jeanty, I would have no problems with that. He's so good. He's so good. I love him. If you can't tell, I love Ashtton Jeanty, and I'm far from alone in that opinion. That's not a hot take whatsoever, but I love Ashtton Jeanty, and I thought he had a phenomenal season last season. I was really hoping that he would transfer so that he could come to Washington before Washington got Jonah Coleman and all the guys that came in from Arizona with Jed Fish. If you guys know, I cover Washington as part of one of my other jobs. I went to Washington, so I am in the area. I get to cover the team. It's awesome. But I was really hoping that Ashtton Jeanty would hit the portal and come to Washington last season. Obviously ended up staying at Boise State. Surprised a lot of people by staying at Boise State because he could play at any school in the country if he really wanted to. And so, like, this is not a guy that's just, like, beating up on Mountain West competition and he's not going to be able to do it in the NFL. He would do this if he was at Alabama. He would do this if he was at Michigan. He would do this if he was at Ohio State. Like, he is that caliber of player. He would do this if he was at Texas. Like, he would be doing this if he was at any school in the country. He is incredible. Far and away my running back one this season. I think there's really, really little to nitpick with his game. The only thing is that, like, he's not the greatest pass blocker. Who cares, man? Like, there's some technique stuff with him, but he's willing and he's competitive as a pass protector even. And so it's not even like he's not trying. Like, he wants to be in there. He just, like, doesn't have the technique quite yet. And he's always going to be a little bit smaller. He's 5'9", 217. He's a little bit more of a bowling ball. And so there's going to be, some up and down reps in pass protection, even if he does develop that technique. But who cares? He's going to be one of the best running backs in the league if he pans out. And, like, people want to do the discourse with Bijan all the time about, like, he's not really panning out. I think if you go back and you watch that Chargers Falcons game that they just played last week, Bijan Robinson is very, very good at football. Ashtton Jeanty is also really good. He's going to be a great NFL player. Probably not for the Chargers, but we can all dream. We can all hope. that's going to do it for this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed, especially that soliloquy about Jeanty at the end. I got a little carried away, but haven't talked about him all season. Needed to get all my thoughts out. We will be back at some point. Maybe we'll come back next week and talk about the playoff teams. Maybe we'll take a week or two off for bowl season and the holidays and all that. So you guys will know the schedule when we know it, which is to be determined. But we'll be back eventually to talk about some more guys. Like I said, we'll be getting more specific here as the weeks go on. Travel is coming up for me. We'll be at the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl at the end of January, and so that's only 6 weeks or so away. So really excited about all the stuff that I'm going to be able to take from that and give to you guys. And so if you are excited about that as well, again, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Find me on social media wherever you are these days. Again, if you're on Twitter, it's at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. If you're on Blue Sky, it's just at Katson. If you're anywhere else, it's probably at Alex Katson as well. And if you're on here, thank you so much for being on here and sitting through another week of me rambling about prospects. This is one of the most fun parts of my week, and so I really appreciate all you guys for being here. I will be back sometime soon. I hope you guys enjoy the wintry months, and I will see you later. Take care.